We're going to just stand by while we fix our technical issue.
All good.
Okay, start the roll call, please.
Certainly. Bolinas Fire District. City of Santa Fe.
Here.
Kenfield Fire. Here. Nevada Fire.
Here.
Stinson Beach Fire.
Here.
Town of Ross.
Here.
City of Larkspur. County Marin.
Here.
Marin Wood. Here. Sleepy Hollow. Town of Corvadera.
Here.
Town of San Anselmo. City of Mill Valley.
In the house.
Inverness Public Utility District.
Here.
Muir Beach. Southern Marin Fire.
Present.
Town of Fairfax.
Here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We have a quorum. Any agenda adjustments? Seeing none, we'll go out to public comment. So the public is welcome to address the Operations Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to the government code, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 2 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when not reporting out. Do we have any public comment?
If there are any members of the public wishing to comment, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand if you're joining by phone. No comment.
Excellent. Moving on to item number 5, Planning and Program Managers Report.
Good morning, everyone. I will just share my screen here. Great. This will be fairly brief. Wanted to point you towards Wildfire Watch. Mark and various folks in this room, Chief Weber, as well as Stephen Torrance and Chief Navarro, took part in a conversation online organized by Fire Safe Marin to talk about the LA fires and lessons learned. So I'd love to invite Mark or Chief Weber to talk a little bit more about that. That's available online now for those who missed it.
Yeah, I think I'm still getting the makeup off my head to reduce the glare from the lights in the TV studio. But, you know, I think the focus was and remains that we're not really learning a whole lot from one, catastrophe after the next. It's a house out approach. It's home hardening and defensible space that are so critical to making a difference. And until we can start to leverage each and every home or get to 80–90% of homes in a community that have actually taken the necessary steps, I think we can expect to see similar results under those wind conditions. There were questions that came up about the water system specifically. I think highlighting the working relationship we have with the water agencies here in the county is important. We work closely, but these water systems are not designed to lose 10,000 homes and have open water butts pouring water out for countless hours. The water system just can't handle that kind of thing. And I think similarly, in the event of an earthquake or other things, we should expect that our water systems are going to be compromised, and have the mechanisms in place to do that. A little discussion about the fire flow assessment that was done years ago that expires in 2029. We had a call the other day, city managers and fire officials. I think renewing that's going to be important to creating, a hardened system. But I think that when we start to look at things like, the water system or some of these other distractors of some of the political stuff, it's taking away from the core issue, which is what we're all focused here on, which is home hardening and defensible space. And if we can't drill that message down to the public, we're not going to be successful. And I think that, certainly as we look at our next work plan and the future, the communications piece, and we're going to cover it here with the fireside stuff that's later in the agenda. How are we going to get folks to take action on every single house in this county to make a difference? And I think, that's the takeaway from Monday night's presentation. I think it should be the emphasis of all of us moving forward, and the important work we're doing here. And we're fortunate that, we have the resources to make the investment to move the needle. And I think we have to look at almost the psychological piece of our residents and how do we get, to actionable items. So I would say that's in a nutshell. Mark or others have anything to add?
Thank you so much for that. That was, I've heard a lot of very grateful comments from the public on that. So thank you for doing that. I want to note that every year we work on supporting our member agencies through a complicated, environmental compliance and regulatory world. So every year we host field refresher trainings for staff. And so we are actively looking for dates in March to invite member agency staff out in the field with some of our biologists, geologists, et cetera, to talk about plants and animals and riparian areas and geology and erosion, slope stability, things like that. So stay tuned. Some of your staff will be joining us hopefully in the field in March. And then I want to invite Mark to provide an update on some events happening in March. We've mentioned this previously, that we'll be helping host the state's Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force meeting here in Marin, March 27th and 28th, plus an event on the 26th, as well as a meeting with the Climate and Wildfire Institute. Mark, do you have some other thoughts?
Yeah, the Climate and Wildfire Institute is very academia and science driven, not a lot of practitioners. And then task force has a lot of practitioners, not as much science and academia. So Marin Wildfire made the recommendation to both groups to co-convene back to back. And there's actually going to be a dated panel that's part of the CWI event that will be kind of rehashed and expanded upon when we get into the task force event to create that connection between the two groups. CWI is an invite-only type event, and they try to keep it small to about 60 people, whereas the task force will be a much larger event targeting around between 200 and 400 people attending. We are calling it a bridge event the evening of the 26th, where we'll have a keynote speaker. It's going to be Daniel Swain from UCLA to talk about some of the climate impacts and wildfire. He's very, very well spoken. He can make really complicated climatic science digestible. And what I really like about Daniel is he's not a there's no way out of this type person. He helps paint a picture how we can get through this crisis. So it's great that we're going to be able to have Daniel as our speaker. The reception event will start at 4:30, and then he'll start speaking at 6. Last about a half an hour, and about a half an hour Q&A Wednesday night. We will be reserving VIP registrations for that bridge event, including all of you guys, our board members, elected officials, and stuff like that, and then open up to general registration for that reception night. And then actually the signups for task force are live now. Thursday will be 4 different panel discussions. And then Friday will be site visits to projects in and around Marin County, Sonoma County, and potentially elsewhere. So we're really looking forward to bringing the task force here. There will be a strong highlight on the collaboration that is Marin Wildfire, and also how we are interacting with our land management agency, specifically through One TAM. And then we will talk about workforce development. It's primarily by bringing some of the Fire Foundry folks, and they will be the panel for the workforce development. You're going to actually get to hear straight from the people that are benefiting from the Fire Foundry program. And then I think there's been an adjustment following the LA fires. There will be a focus on some of the LA fires during there.
Thanks, Mark. And that's it for me. Happy to take questions.
All right, any questions for Ann or Mark on the report? Yep, John?
Real quick, Mark, what was the date of the evening keynote again?
March 26th.
Got it. Thanks.
And on that, I think for that particular meeting, Mark, you'd sent out an email just recently talking about how agencies can participate. Can you share that with everyone?
Yeah, you bet. The task force is hosted by the California Natural Resources Agency, but they don't have a big budget to be able to put on the task force event itself. So they asked for fundraising. We're about halfway to our fundraising goal of $70,000. So the email I sent to that you guys received yesterday is if any of your agencies or people that you know would like to financially support or table at the event, that email will contain that. Thank you, Bill.
Right. So it's a great opportunity for all of our zones and agencies to kind of highlight the work that we're doing, and with people that make big decisions, and we can show what kind of an example that we've been able to be. And so it's also an opportunity, I think, for you to potentially bring other elected officials, because there's going to be a table, right? You can purchase tables.
Correct. If you're familiar with the Embassy Suites, I think most of us have been to an event at the Embassy Suites. For the task force, we'll have all of those 4 conference rooms that can be one. We'll have all of those, and that hallway space that goes around it will all be available for tabling. So we anticipate to have about 30 tables of different entities showing and talking about what they're doing.
Okay, very good. Any other questions for Ann or Mark? All right, if we can go out to the public.
Any members of the public wishing to speak, please raise your hands in the reactions or press star 9 to raise your hand if you're joining by phone. No public comment.
Okay, great. Moving on to item 6, we have 2 action items. A is the chair, vice chair elections. And I understand we've got some enthusiastic member that is ready to take up the responsibilities. So
If I could, before we move on to that, Ann and I would really like to acknowledge the leadership and everything that you've provided, Bill, as fire chief for Novato. Before Marin Wildfire ever came about, you were one of the leaders up front. Your out-of-the-box thinking, your innovation, your leadership really helped drive the creation of Marin Wildfire. And then your leadership as a fire chief in general across the entire county. And then 2 terms as a chair for the operations committee. And I don't think we're going to really let you fully retire. I have a feeling that we're going to be reaching back out to you and asking you for all that. But Ann and I wanted to acknowledge your leadership and everything that you've given to Marin Wildfire and present this very coveted coffee cup.
all right, look at that. Hey. Mark, thanks very much. Yeah, thank you, Ann. Thank you so much. That was very special. And I really, nothing gets done without the collaboration of everyone. And I've always just been amazed and proud of the work that both city managers and fire chiefs have done with the support of their organizations to be able to stand this up and make this work in very powerful, concrete ways. And so thank you for everything that you all have been doing. And I just am so proud of the work, and I think there's such a great structure, and I just can't imagine Marin now without MWPA. And so I hope to be able to help support that, going forward. So I'm not going anywhere, but be happy to come by and see you and talk with you and still come to meetings from time to time. So thank you so much. Appreciate that. All right, but the business of 6A. So I think what we're looking for is a potential nomination then for chair and vice chair positions. And I believe Chief Weber was not at the last meeting, and I've had an opportunity to speak with him. And I believe that he is in a position where he'd like to step up and take that chair. So if we can get a nomination for chair and vice chair.
I'd
we
like
can
to
have-
nominate Chief Weber. I think I did last meeting too, by the way, for the record.
And I'd like to nominate Cusimano for vice chair.
All right. So we have a nomination of Chief Weber for chair and Todd Cusimano for vice chair. Is there any other people that would like to throw their name in the hat? All right, hearing none. Any discussion on the nomination? Okay, do we go out to public comment?
Any members of the public wishing to speak, please raise your hand in the reactions or press star 9 to raise your hand by phone. No public comment.
All right, great. So let's bring it back for a vote, please.
Certainly. Let's see. City of Santa Fe,
Yes.
Kenfield,
Yes.
Novato,
Yes.
Stinson Beach,
Yes.
Town of Ross,
Yes.
County of Marin,
Yes.
Marinwood,
Yes.
Town of Corte Madera,
Yes.
City of Mill Valley,
Yes.
Inverness,
Yes.
Southern Marin,
Yes.
Town of Fairfax.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, excellent. So just for point of order, does that mean that Jason's doing it now or does he do it at the next meeting?
We'll let you finish the meeting.
All right, okay. All right. All right, thank you so much. Great work, everyone. Thank you, Jason and Todd, for stepping up to take on these important roles. Moving on to action item 6B, update to the work plan, strategic guidance.
Great, thank you. So as you know, we have strategic guidance from the Operations Committee that we review and update each year. We discussed it last time around in January and decided that we wanted to modify or add some language. Just as a review, we have language currently about the house out approach, the home hardening and DSpace work, shaded fuel breaks, prescribed fire, evacuations, insurance, and public education already. And in January, the Operations Committee decided that we would like to add some language regarding updates to Zone 0 and LRA maps and ordinances, local ordinances. And so thought it would be a good idea to draft up some language and see if this more or less reflects your intent. So if you wouldn't mind taking a look at the proposed number 8 up on the screen and also in your staff report that's attached to the agenda, feel free to provide any thoughts, edits, etc. And then we can discuss and potentially approve language that is, discussed today or substantially similar, and I can work with the chair to finalize.
What's that? I'm sorry. Could you just repeat that last part?
Sure. We can decide today to approve something like this or similar. We can provide edits in real time today, and I can work with you to finalize the language and it with the Operations Committee's support.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
And I think we have a couple comments in the room.
The chair.
Yeah, go ahead,
I
Krista.
just have a quick question. Are these priorities prioritized?
Are they prioritized in the work plan?
No, here under background, it lists the priorities. And I'm wondering, are they in priority order or are they all priorities?
I believe they're all priorities unless the Operations Committee has something else to say about it, but they're all listed equally
Okay.
in our list of strategic guidance for development of the fiscal year 25-26 work plan.
Okay, thank you.
On the actual language,
Mhm.
you know, I think because this would be ordinances that are being brought forward by each individual municipality, we could say provide input, or we could say highlight the importance of a zone zero ordinance and work with member agencies
Mhm.
to support the process. I know it's wordsmithing a bit, but because this ultimately is going to be individual, and I think also why we have everybody's attention and meeting with the Association of Marin Realtors yesterday, their president, consistency across the county would be very, very helpful, and I think it causes all of us less grief.
Mhm.
So, you know, maybe we add the word, you know, helping consistency, something to that effect, um, as agencies move forward with. And as background, the state is releasing the LRA maps. Ours are coming out on February 24th. Areas of very high will have impacts with ordinances that we have to be at least greater than in stringent, from a stringent perspective, can't be less, right, than the state. And those will affect very high at this point. Now, we haven't seen everything, so we're operating in the dark a little bit. So I think that having this in here is good, because I think what we just wrapped up and said was all the lessons we've learned are the first 5 feet, how critical and important it is, a house out approach. So I would just wordsmith a little bit. But I think it's an important piece to add, especially for this next work plan.
Great.
Any other comments or questions on a revision to that? Okay, so with regards to the rest of the plan, then, is everyone comfortable with the priorities that have been identified and the fact that there's not necessarily one priority over another, but that those have areas where we need to all work more in? Okay, so if we're satisfied with that, then and are you still thinking, Ann, you're going to bring something back, or?
Yeah, how about if I modify the language and include it in the next month's staff report, and I'll work with you, Chief Tyler, and you, Chief Weber, and any others who'd like to, as long as we don't have a quorum, any others who'd like to be part of that wordsmithing, and then bring that to this group next month.
Okay,
Well, and for the interest of time and direction to the technical advisory, I think we have a concept. If the group's comfortable, I think pushing this down with understanding that the wordsmithing the zone ordinance, but we give them this as guidance as it's drafted now even.
Jason, I'd also add, I think that'd be critical if we're directing the FPOs to work on a county-wide ordinance for zone zero and home hardening. Getting that earlier than later will be beneficial.
yeah, and the difficulty there, obviously, too, Chris, is that the state hasn't even defined what zone zero is going to be. And so, and I guess the governor's executive order directed them to do that by the end of the year, but our ordinances will need to, well, I mean, that'll come sliding in right at the end there, likely, right? So, okay.
Yeah, I would only add, in front of consistency, just that term countywide. It just makes it clear that all agencies, you're looking to get something that is, well, consistent.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so then it sounds like we've all reached agreement on this. So if we can just then get a, we're looking for a motion then for action to be able to take this forward with some revised language around consistency and
Yeah,
and allow the ATC group to get to work on the work plan without delay.
Sounds
Could I
great.
make a motion that we don't have to bring this back? I think we're all comfortable with it. So I think the motion on the floor would be, great work. It reflects what our goals are and objectives for the work plan. You've got some guidance on this new bullet point that was added. Move forward with that little bit of wordsmithing and send it to the ATC.
Sounds great.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Let's go out to public comment.
There are no hands raised this time.
All right, bringing it back for a vote, please.
Senator Fell,
Yes.
Kenfield,
Yes.
Novato,
Yes.
Stinson Beach,
Yes.
Town of Ross,
Yes.
County of Marin,
Yes.
Marinwood,
Yes.
Corte Madera,
Yes.
Mill Valley,
Yes.
Inverness,
Yes.
Southern Marin,
Yes.
Fairfax.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. So discussion items, 7A is work plan development update.
Great. And I'll go back to sharing my screen. So I just want to start out by proposing that we have a little more communication in between the ATC and ops. And so I've invited the chair of and vice chair of the ATC to join the operations committee meetings. Unfortunately, they're not able to join us today. But they do plan on joining us in the future and reporting out from those committees and listening into these conversations. And then I'd also like to invite someone from ops to join at the ATC and make sure you're hearing the staff level conversations that are going on at that committee. So that's something that we can discuss how we want to move forward, but let me know if that's something you're interested in doing. I want to include this slide, as I always do, just because I want to show the timeline, all the upcoming milestones that are coming in this process of developing the work plan. The bold item, February 13th, that's today. So we've got our operations committee meeting happening today, and tomorrow on the 14th, that's our deadline internally to submit JPA-wide proposals for consideration this year. So they're in progress. Many are updated into the web portal right now, and others will be later today and into tomorrow. So we've been talking a lot about what those might look like, what potential budget numbers are going to be, and so we'll be sharing that with ATC and with you all for additional discussion. Lots of activity in March. The ATC and various member agencies are actively brainstorming project proposals and are now entering them into the portal. So we'll have a lot more information about what projects are coming up. I've been paying very close attention to that and meeting with different member agency reps to figure out what kind of environmental compliance might be needed for next year so that I can get a better idea for what that budget should look like. Especially any projects that would come under the kind of environmental compliance bucket. Now would probably also be a good time to consider for this group forming an ad hoc subcommittee to start reviewing proposals in March and really digging into budgets and proposals, etc. I want to give you a preview of what those JPA-wide proposals are starting to look like. It's a list. I don't have budget numbers finalized yet, or I guess drafted yet for everything, but I wanted to at least give you a heads up for what we're looking at this season. And these are still in the draft form. So just a bulleted list here. The top several are continuations of things that you've seen before. The bottom ones are either new or modified slightly from previous years. So I just wanted to note where there's any change. Environmental compliance for core projects, that'll continue. I anticipate that number will go down as it has every year because we're seeing fewer and fewer new projects. So that's a place of savings in terms of the JPA-wide budget. We'll be continuing with the Genesis and Ladris AI subscription, Fireside subscription. I assume the regional wildfire disaster preparedness coordination. So I'll be talking with some folks about that to see how that's going and what's in the works. Data-driven wildfire risk framework, that's a continuation of the modeling, the pathways work, etc. The grant program and direct assistance, that'll continue, and we'll be seeking input from various member agencies, those who've been working on that program and providing input previously. Chipper Day program will continue largely unchanged. GIS program will continue. That ends up being a really important kind of function of our work and how we track it. Wildfire education services and resources, that's public education. We'll be continuing and working with Fire Safe Marin on that proposal. Operational costs, not too many changes there. VMSs, our veg management specialist positions, we heard this last time around that it made more sense to budget them out of the JPA-wide kind of core proposals rather than trying to charge some of their times to projects. That ended up being really challenging to try to track what projects they're spending their time on and how much and what kinds of activities to charge. So I think there was general consensus that we're going to be lumping those in with the JPA-wide proposals. Insurance for Marin Wildfire, that's something that Mark has been working on to make sure we're insured adequately. So that's an increase in cost from previous years. CWPP, Mark has been working on this RFP that was released January 17th. Proposals are due tomorrow. So stay tuned for updates there. But we'll be working with all of you to move forward on that. Ordinance updates, we thought it would be a good idea to record it in the work plan as something that we're all working towards, but it may just have a $0 amount, just coordination, support, etc. But I think it's a record of the things that we're actively working on as Marin Wildfire member agencies, and I think it would be good to record that. Countywide fire road inventory and assessment. This was something that San Rafael put in last year, and I don't believe that the budget has been spent yet, but I anticipate quite a bit of activity for that project coming up soon. So no new budget there, but that was an item in last year's work plan. And then the wildfire risk perception survey, that was in last year's work plan, and no new budget is proposed for that. I think that we are now using the results of that work towards our activities. So any questions on any of that? You'll hear more about each of these proposals and the dollar amounts allocated to each or proposed for each coming up soon.
Just one on the Fire Safe Marin continuation. You know, I thought there was a little bit of discussion possibly about Ember Stomp and you know, where it's been so wildly successful and it's expanding, and it really is a signature event that brings together so many different facets, not just the public, but vendors, insurance companies, you know, also targeted audiences that are otherwise hard to reach, young families and whatnot. And so my understanding is that they're looking for additional support rather than trying to piecemeal it together or raise funds as they go. So I don't know if there's anything.
Good catch, Bill. That is a missing bullet point on this page. So thank you for highlighting that. Rather than having it be part of Fire Safe Marin's proposal, we were looking at making Ember Stomp a separate proposal that'll have a budget item of a not to exceed, but with the goal of still trying to do fundraising, but to make sure that we don't have to kill them with the fundraising.
Yeah, it's hard to plan something while you're trying to raise money for it at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for catching that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Chief, thank you, by the way. I like the bullet list. Is it possible, as the work plan kind of gets more developed, a sentence or two with each that kind of explains or talks to the anticipated outcome or the goal of each of these? You know, why are we doing this? What do we want to get out of this? Or what is the hope that this will achieve or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. And that'll be a main focus of next month's operations committee meeting. We'll dig into the JPA-wide proposals. Yeah. That's great.
Yes.
So, and the zone-specific proposals are due March 15th?
Yeah,
March.
first drafts are due mid-March, and then by the end of March, we're hoping for kind of pencils down all submittals into the work plan portal to give us more time to discuss and for the operations committee to review.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I just have Bill, the only thing is I think that going back to what we just discussed with, the need to figure out how to get into each household, I think the importance of Fire Safe Marin, the communications piece, as we move forward, is going to be a big part of this next year or 2 or 3, because we've got to figure out how to get into the household, and the reach they have is pretty impressive. And I think we're going to have to make sure that investment's there, just planting that seed.
Yeah, I mean, Fire Safe Marin really is us, right? It is the penetration into people's computers and their screens and the messaging and all of that is MWPA. Yeah, and having conversations, on so many different ways. And I know they have an annual report that was done. I don't recall if there was a reporting out on that, but we should all be mindful of the work that they're doing.
The January board meeting, I believe, is when we had a report out from Fire Safe Marin on their annual report, and it was pretty awesome. And one thing I want, not only does Fire Safe Marin do their own public outreach, but they actually take off their Fire Safe Marin hat and put a Marin Wildfire hat on. Every social media post that you see that comes from Marin Wildfire is actually Fire Safe Marin coordinating for that. All the outreach that's branded as Marin Wildfire, it's actually Fire Safe Marin doing it with their Marin Wildfire hat on.
Yeah, and for example, the workshop that we're hosting, they're very involved, with that as well. Right. Okay. Any other questions? Can we go out to public comment?
Any members of the public wishing to speak, please raise your hand in the reactions. And there's no public comment.
Okay. Thank you very much. And no action needed, right? Correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going on to 7B, using targeted messaging to increase resident actions.
Yes. So we have Jason Brooks with Fireside with us today to help present this item. So Jason, please feel free to take it away.
Thanks. Good morning. And I'll just share my screen with the slides in 1 second. Just confirming everyone can see it.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, thank you. All right. So good morning. So I'll just spend a little bit of time just talking and very much in this everything the group was just speaking about, how to use education, how to use messaging to get residents to take action. So start up for this. Ultimately, the challenge and the question that was put to us with the Defensible Space Alliance last year was, how do we most cost effectively increase resident actions on the highest wildfire risk on their property, and keep thinking about that cost effectiveness. And as everyone in this group knows, but certainly the challenge with that is that, every single parcel is different. Every single resident is in a different place. And even the issue on that parcel is different. How people think about the wooden fence attached to their house is different than how they think about vegetation. So with that, one of the ways that we organized it and helped think about how to think about this problem space is you have to sort of divide residents and divide residents and then the items into their ability and their willingness. Are they able to take care of the problem, but less willing, or more willing? Are they unable to take care of it? And so you can see some of those kinds of questions. What is the cost? What happens if I don't, etc. But once you start to think about each item and each resident and each parcel in that sense, what it then lets you do is then try to figure out what is the right messaging and the right approach for each of those, because each of us are in different positions and those things change over time. So education works better in one area, urgency works better in one, resources, et cetera, support. And so I'm just going to talk through a couple of examples that we learned from some pilot that we ran last year as we step through that. So backstory on this is, last year we were in partnership with the Defensible Space Alliance, asked to sort of really focus in on how can we use personalized messaging. I should also call out Fire Safe Marin was instrumental. We partnered with them to help make sure the messaging was very much aligned with all of the work that they've done, all of the insights they have. And so we sort of built off of their shoulders the foundation, and then brought that into different types of targeted messaging and stuff for residents. The way that this was deployed, as many in this group probably know, but over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of community engagement through Chipper Day and the Defensible Space Inspection. So we have emails and we have other types of indicators of resident behavior. Have they looked at their report before? Have they resolved any items? So think of that as the data or the insights that were sort of coming into this. In what we'll call the pre-season, so before inspection season started, there was very targeted messaging to residents based on what they'd done before. So if we knew someone had grass and weeds on their property before, very likely that grass and weeds has grown back. And so you can customize and make the messaging specific to them at the beginning of the season. And then very targeted, sort of 14 days before that neighborhood was going to be inspected, very targeted messaging went to them. Get ready for your inspector. Your inspection is coming soon. Your evaluation is here. Things to get ready for. And then for the 14 days after that, all just focused on engagement around opening the report. Open, open, open. We got to get you to interact with the content, or for residents that need it, send them mail, but primarily about that engagement. And then finally, now that we've gotten you to sort of engage with the content, how do we actually get you to take action? Or if you're not going to take action, at least tell us why. And I'll explain that in just a second, because that helps think about behavior change. Summary of results here, and I'll kind of explain attribution. The way this works is there's many touch points for resident. They might see a sign from their fire department. They might have been sent an email. They may have had someone knock on their door, gone to Ember Stomp, etc. So the way we tried to work this out is ultimately we looked for attribution is did a digital targeted message get to that resident, and did we see them take the action we wanted in 21 days? And if they did, then we took attribution. If we did not, then we did not take attribution for it. You guys can kind of see across the top, but what we were able to measure, and I should add in here, in every one of these campaigns, there's a control group. So usually that's about 10% that would be held out from the targeted messaging. That means they would get the regular communications, maybe the base comms, a door hanger, the regular email, but they didn't get the specific messaging. And that 10% holdout was always statistically significant. So we could really measure what was the change against the control group. 59% first season openers, the first time they opened, came out of that. 56% of the first resident resolution came within those 21 days. And then what we also saw is where people got those targeted messages, we saw 3x in the resolution rate. So actually taking action to resolve things. Examples of what this looked like, and there's many, so I won't bore this group, but just to give you a sense of like very specifically, during this property, we identified juniper on your property, hazardous vegetation, here's a photo, here's this item. And where we were delivering these types of targeted messaging, we saw 1.5x higher resolution rate than just the generic email. So by putting the imagery specific to what was on their property, specific things, we saw the kind of lift, like I said, a 1.5 lift in there. I'm going to speak about fences for a minute, because I think this is actually really interesting. So we would tell someone this wood fence is one of the most hazardous items on your property. And then we'd ask them, what do you think? Do you agree? 62% of residents did not rank it in the top risk category. They gave it a 0, a 1, or a 2. So we already have a disconnect, right? This is one of the highest risk items on their property, and they don't agree with that. So then we'd start doing educational drips, just explaining to them, linking into content from Fire Safe Marin and other types of resources, just reminders. And then we'd survey them to say, how likely are you to actually make a change now that we've done some of these drip campaigns? And we got the majority of this group to at least commit to that they would make a change to their fence in the next 3 years. And of course, we can think about how to accelerate those timelines. We'll continue to learn and iterate around it. But the theme here and the idea is, once we understand why, first of all, where their attitudes are, do they even agree it's a risk? And then how do we actually get them to then sort of change their mind? And then the challenge, of course, is can we shorten those 3 years to 2 years? It is worth noting that cost and time are the biggest barriers to resolution. When people would say why they wouldn't do it sooner than 3 years, it always came down to cost and time. I mean, there was a few other aesthetics, but cost and time were the biggest variables there. Last example, I'll just sort of illustrate in here. There was a fire in Marin last year. Immediately, we geo-targeted residents that were near that fire. So these were people just in the neighborhood around that. We sent the photo that was actually from the response teams. And it was, again, a very targeted message to people that had not opened their report before, had not engaged with content. And what we immediately saw against the control group was a 22% lift in open rates. So just the fact that there was a recency, that there was an event, a photo that was something they had just seen, immediately were able to pull on that to drive engagement. And so we continually are just thinking about and looking for ways to like capture people in the moment when they're much more poised to take action. And certainly the fires in LA being examples of a moment in time, but we have these trigger points where people are much more receptive, and being able to target it and then geographically not just blast it to everyone, but hit the neighborhoods that sort of saw this out their back window. The last kind of thing I'll just share with you. So in this other work that we tried to do is we sort of been thinking a lot around what's the cost to get someone to get a home to be a resolver? How do we get, like when we think about the fully loaded cost for the program and doing all this great work that's out there. And so then we measured when we intercepted those comms, and we're sort of like driving more resolution rates, et cetera, versus without. And you can kind of see the difference in here. And so the challenge or the thing we're constantly thinking about is, how do you continue to drive that down? How do we get the average cost to become a resolver? Just keep pushing it down and looking at different tools and different levers that would go out into that. I've been happy to share any of the kind of the background on these calculations. Last things, so priorities for 2025 as we're building off of this, we've learned a lot what messaging has worked. So how do we immediately take that JPA wide, make sure that we're using all those best practices for every single agency in there. We're going to continue to do nurturing. So just because you said last year you were 3 years out from changing your fence, well, that means you're in year 2. So we're going to be getting different messaging in front of you and just kind of keep pushing people to think about where they are and their things. We have people that started to resolve things in 24. Now we need to get them to finish the job in 25. We're going to be doing a lot of push into zone 0, very specific zone 0 messaging and how we can drive clean zone 0 actions, bringing some of the risk score stuff into that. So how do we prioritize the items based on better like kind of dynamic risk score stuff? And then lastly, looking at some neighborhood level social pressures. One of the common messages we see in the feedback from residents is everybody says, how's my neighborhood doing? How am I doing? Really referring to their neighborhood, not all of them are in that sense. And so we're going to look at ways to sort of like leverage that for social pressure and let people know, hey, your neighborhood's doing great. Your neighborhood's not doing great. Here's the things you need to focus on in as a community level. Final thoughts, and then happy to take any questions. I just pulled this out here just to share, like, personalized messaging to get people to change things around their home really, really works, right? I mean, Home Depot's up 238% as they've invested in personalized data. And so I often do some of these talks where I actually think about like our competition as, as community trying to change things is against a place like a Home Depot or an Ace. They spend a lot of money getting people to change their fence, change their vegetation, get to behavior change around their property. And we should be constantly learning and kind of copying what they're doing because it's incredibly effective. And finally, while in this conversation, I was really focused on the specific, like those digital targeted communications. I do want to really also make sure everyone realizes that doesn't solve everything. And so if you really look at like what drove the first report opened in 2024, targeted comms was almost 45% was half. The interaction with the inspector, that leave behind that door hanger, and all the out of home space. And so the summary for this group would hopefully be is just realizing the breadth of the tools and going back to my Home Depot example. Home Depot is doing a lot in targeted messaging to get people to change their vegetation, but Home Depot also does billboards and events and all these other things because collectively it works. So hopefully that's a good update. I'm happy to take questions or whatever is appropriate in this forum.
Thank you so much, Jason. Appreciate that. Any questions for Jason on his presentation?
Chief, I just had a quick question. Jason, thank you. Looking at this stats page that you have of 59% of first in season report opens, do you have that further broken down where you're looking at? Because my assumption would be for those who interact with an inspection or an evaluation, if they get a good, if they walk away saying your house looks great, they're probably not going to open up the follow-up and so forth. People who don't get a good one might be more interested in opening it up. I don't know that. I'm just wondering if you kind of break it down that way based on, I don't know, if an inspection received a grade, those who get a C, are you getting more opens than those who get an A, so on and so forth?
Yeah, so we do track on that. We even track on some metrics around like inspector, I'll call it performance of the quality of inspection. I don't have that in front of me, but I'd be happy to like get that back to Mark or Ann to get to you. I just don't have it in front, but that data is available.
Jason, I may have missed this. The personalized contacts, are we pulling in like voter registration data from those addresses that we know is connected to an email address? Is that publicly sourced data, available?
So Chief, right now we are not. All of this data is first party given, meaning that the resident has either interacted with an inspector in the field, provided that information. They've come to an MWPA site to like look at their report and provided that information, or they've signed up for Chipper Day and again provided that permission. So the permissioning of this, if you will, is the resident has volunteered and put that information in. We are not sourcing from any other source, any other external sources at this point in time. Doesn't mean we couldn't just have it.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Yeah, if we did have email addresses, excuse me, per parcel, could we give that to you to be able to source that better? Would that be of interest?
Yes, so we do in some of our other agencies where we've consumed that. HOAs, for example, will have an email on every single parcel. I will comment, I mean, 3 years in, we've got a pretty high email rate on quite a few parcels already. I mean, some communities were like 80-90% or have already provided that, but doesn't mean we'll take what we can't get elsewhere.
Thank you.
And when I say we, I should be really clear. This is MWPA, right? This is we're a processor of this is your data. But
Jason, I'm wondering if there's a distinction because there's basically like two kinds of assessments. There's the ones that are just done where no one's home and there wasn't really actually an in-person interaction. And then there's the ones where they make an appointment and they may even be present for the whole, as they walk around and hear stuff firsthand. And so is there any distinction to be made between that, that 56% of people opening, like more of those are when there's a 360 evaluation, if you will, versus just one that was done, there was never a face-to-face interaction with an owner?
yes, yeah, there definitely is difference in behavior. Again, I didn't have it in front of me, but yes, we can, and I can bring that back. But there is differences for, if a homeowner, if the homeowner is there, I mean, the gold standard is the homeowner is present and they walk with the inspector. We see the highest resolution rates when that happens, full stop, right? Just across all of Marin. Now, having said that, there's other ways you can get closer and closer to that, nudges, points at it. But the gold standard, if you want to get resolution, is an inspector spends 20-30 minutes walking around the property with the resident. We see the highest resolution rates there. But I can get you the specifics on the open rates by different types.
Yeah, and I think I would like to know that. I'm just off the top of your head, like what percentages are we seeing there? Is it like of all the inspections that are done across all in MWPAs, is it, 20% of them are in person, with full 360, or is it less than that, or is it more than that?
If you give me 1 second, I actually just had that up from Marin. So if you can, sorry, Paul, I'll tell you that really quickly.
And while he's pulling that up, Bill, we're actually working on the final edits to a public dashboard that would show exactly what you're asking.
Yeah.
Okay, so to answer your question, Chief, in Marin County, 48% of all homes have had a full access inspection since, and this is over the past 3 years. So roughly 50% of Marin has had full access.
Okay, that's good. That's higher than I thought.
It
Okay.
is for sure.
All right. So any other questions?
Bill, not a question. I just want to acknowledge the importance of our public-private partnership that we have with Fireside. Absolutely amazing. The first public-private partnership Marin Wildfire had. And I think a good portion of our success that number of 48% of full parcel inspections, I think is a lot to do with the partnership that we have with Fireside. And as fire professionals, as city managers, town managers, we're not necessarily experts on how to get communications out and how to change behavior. Jason brings in people who specifically know how to do that. So that's all this different messaging and the success we have. It's because of the people Jason brings in and us being a partner with Jason. So I just wanted to shout that out and how important that is for us.
Yeah, that's money well spent. And it's likely going to take a lot more money to really push people into action. Now, at 40-something%, they now know what they need to do. So now it's how do we push them into action?
Yes.
Incentivize, but also, carrot stick, whatever that balance is. Yes.
On a big picture for messaging, how does MWPA handle the issue of tenants? So for example, I live in South Nevada, lived there, I'm a tenant 3 years. Property owner ignores any requests for stuff. I don't know if there's never been an inspection where I live, and I'm not sure what the tenant rate is in Marin County, but how is this messaging pushed out to tenants?
It depends on the jurisdiction. Jason, I'll ask you to step in if I misspeak or you have additional information. But when the resident report, whether it's a drive-by or it's a scheduled appointment, it's driven primarily by the resident that living there rather than by the property owner. And so when and it's one of those things that we have to make sure that we're getting, like you're saying, that message to the right person. And so we'll get parcel data who the property owner is, but a lot of times it's the resident that's receiving the actual report. Jason, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'd say, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The other Jason.
Brooks, yeah,
Okay, sorry. You want me to go, correct?
please.
Okay, so to answer the answer is kind of building off what Mark said. If the resident is home at the time, whatever a tenant or otherwise, they are given the access code. They have access to that information to see it. So we see, and by the way, we do when they come into the system, we ask them what their relationship to the property is. Are they a renter? Are they the owner, etc. So we get a little bit of information from in there. In the case of like Nevada, when they're sending out the letters after they've been by a property, they're being sent to the property address themselves, right? And if you don't get a response there, then it can fall back to the legal owner. On vacant lots, then they have to go to the legal owner. I mean, there's no one to receive mail. So it kind of varies a little bit, I would say, in there. But by and large, I think, the overall focus is to get it to the person that is in the property, because they're the ones who need that information the most. So that's always kind of the general focus as much as possible.
Thank you. That's comforting.
I
Okay.
also want to note that these slides are available to you all now. They're attached to the agenda.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I would just say, if you haven't seen one of Fireside's reports, take a look at it. From the days when we were doing carbon copy, 1 page, press hard, here's your copy. These are things to do, to videos and pictures and things that people can relate, links to how to mitigate stuff. It really has taken us to the next level. So if you haven't opened a report and seen it, I would strongly suggest you do, because it's super helpful and informative for the resident. And it's quite the product he's built.
Okay, can we go out with that? If we're done with comments here, questions, let's go out to the public.
Any members of the public wishing to speak, please raise your hand in the reactions. No public comment.
Okay, Jason, thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Very good. All right, moving on to discussion item C, coordination on local responsibility area fire hazard severity zone maps.
Great. So I'll also be asking others to discuss this item, but just a quick intro for those really at home, I think, who are less familiar with what we've been alluding to today so far. This is a screenshot of the Cal Chiefs update that was just posted on social media very recently. The local responsibility area fire hazard severity zone maps that the state releases are going to be updated. The one for the Bay Area is going to be released on February 24th. They're being released in phases. Additionally, we're going to get some Zone 0 regulations from the state coming up really soon, with opportunity to provide public comment. They're going to be presented to the Board of Forestry Resource Protection Committee in March. There will be a public comment period, and then local jurisdictions will need to then adopt their own ordinances, which must meet or exceed the state regulations. So what I'd like to do with this committee and also with ATC is have this topic be a standing item for the agenda, because I have a feeling we're going to have a lot to discuss as more information comes out, as maps are released, as presentations occur at the state on Zone 0, etc. The ATC spend a lot of time discussing this topic as well. And we also had the fire prevention officers, or FPOs, discussing this as well. So I'd like to make sure that we're all communicating and we're all kind of on the same page and not working in parallel without that communication. So at the ATC, we've got Marshall now with Southern Marin Fire, who's on the ATC and also involved in the FPO group. And so there's definitely going to be some coordination between ATC and the FPOs, and I'd encourage some cross-contamination between ATC and the Operations Committee to make sure we're all discussing it and approaching it together rather than separately. So So that's my suggestion for now, and I invite some conversation about this and how we'd like to approach this.
So maybe cross-pollination, not cross-contamination.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just say what is just so interesting here, and there's going to be a lot of, I think, focus from the public. They're going to be paying attention to this now. What's so different is when the state did the maps the last time, which was like 2010 or whenever that occurred. They provided state responsibility area maps first that showed very high, high, and moderate. Then in that over 10 years since, they've updated those and they went through the process and they published those. So those are on the website at CAL FIRE. And there was a definite increase. Areas that, maybe used to be considered moderate became high. More areas became very high, for example. And then there are certain regulations and requirements that are attached to those different hazard severity levels. The local hazard severity zone maps back in 2010 came out and they only identified very high. So when you looked at your city or town on these maps, it would just be grayed out if they didn't tell you it was moderate or high. You only saw very high, and then certain requirements kicked in. So what's happening that's different in these maps is they're not only showing the very high, they're gonna show the high also. And there's going to be some requirements about that. So instead of just seeing a grayed out Novato, for example, city limits with some very high that ended up landing down in Pacheco Valley somewhere and kind of in the Marinwood area too, you're going to now see high. And that I think is going to get people's attention. And it will be up to all of us, starting with the FPOs, to decide on our local areas, are the requirements of high, what's required new, is that enough? Or will zone 0 and some of the other things that might have applied to very high, should that also apply to the high? Because the fire's not going to stop at very high, right? The fire's going to go where it's blown. And the fire's going to spread in areas where people don't take the mitigations. So that is why this is so important. For people to see how it's communicated, how we're coordinating what we want to do in those high areas. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Yes.
I just have a basic question. Is this going to be in addition to the 3-year fire code update? This is completely separate? Completely separate new thing. And the idea, and I would very much like to have that consistency across jurisdictions, and I'd like to have a template ordinance and a template staff report that I could bring forward.
Yep.
Thank you.
So how would this roll up? So we'd have the ops committee, the ATC, we would work together, we'd formalize this ordinance. When we're ready to go, develop our team to go on the road to every jurisdiction. And I assume before we go out of the box, we would want a sign off from the MWPA board as well, just from the political policy standpoint. Like, how do you guys see that playing out?
Well, there's two
I'm
parts
just
to this
throwing-
as I understand it.
And on my way off, I'm just trying to wrap my head around.
Yeah. So I think there's two parts to it. One is the adoption of the map, right? And that is what it is.
Right.
And the state requirements for whatever happens in those areas is
I'm
what
going
it
back
is.
to the zone 0 kind of discussion. I'm not.
No. Right. I'll get there. So whether or not we want to increase where zone 0 would apply, that's going to be done in the fire code adoption that will happen later. So this is just a map adoption first, and then we'll have time as communities, as this group, to discuss what would then need to go, what above what the state has do we want to apply in those various areas.
And
How do you
Adam,
see
go
that?
ahead. Adam set his hand up very patiently.
Sorry, no, oh wait, I cut you off. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. I was just, in terms of the timing, I think it speaks to, to the point that was raised earlier by Krista, just while it's separate, this zone 0 proposal, which I don't know if anybody, I'm sort of assuming by what you're saying that is intended to only apply in the very high areas that are mapped. at least initially. Would that then sync up with the adoption of the building code? That happens at the end of this year, fire code, building code process, toward the end of the year, or is it an entirely separate process that has to be done earlier, for example? Or is that just a political decision?
I think that's a political decision, and I think what we're waiting for is fire professionals to see what comes out of the state. Now, the State Board of Forestry had direction, and I think to have guidance completed by, I want to say it was like January 1st, 2023. Don't quote me on the number. But I think there's enormous political pressure for that. Because we can't be less stringent, we have to be equal to or greater. We really need to see the statewide ordinance to build consistency and make sure we're not doing things differently in the SRA and the very high compared to the LRA or other spaces. So I think for the fire chiefs in the room, we will task typically our fire prevention officers to develop like ordinances across. But I think we have to wait and see what's being delivered from the state first. And that may coincide with our 3-year ordinance adoption by fluke. But I think there is political interest in moving this faster than that. And we're going to have to balance that with getting it right or amending under the ordinance work that would be done later in the year. I'm thinking out loud and looking at my partners, but typically with fire ordinance stuff, we will task our FPOs. We will wait to see what the state, language is. And then, certainly we could come back and present here, but I don't necessarily see this body or MWPA as the body that would be moving ordinances forward. Historically that's been done with our FPOs, fire chiefs, their policy leadership, city managers, as process. Does anybody see that differently?
I totally agree, Jason. I see Marin Wildfire as being a resource and support for the initiative. We can help provide the tools. We can help if following Todd's recommendation last meeting of a presentation team, we can help with the development of that presentation. So it's a set presentation, but then we also can help coordinate consistency through the ATC, through ops, you guys be all hearing the same message. And then what I had kind of told the board at our last board meeting when Zone Zero was a popular topic, I said, as you guys as board members of the MWPA, it's going to be important for you to carry that consistent message to your colleagues on your boards and councils so that we can maintain that consistent ordinance language rather than have it get changed as it goes through the public process at each municipality.
Through the chair. So I hear what you're saying, Mark, about the role of MWPA and absolutely as a resource from a smaller city's perspective to be able to come to my council and my community and say, MWPA, who are the experts, this is what they're recommending that every jurisdiction in the county recommend. That's very powerful for me. I mean, I have a council member who's very active with MWPA, but that's a lot. I mean, she's already, you've got the whole tree issue, right? Trees are so great, but then, so she's really, we've done a lot, I think, in our community of trying to update our tree list and all this kind of stuff. But it's really powerful, I think, to have MWPA give us a sample ordinance. And because who else am I guess, are you saying, Chief Weber, that it would more likely be coming from the inspection, the prevention folks, like they do every 3 years, they all work together to put together a fire code update?
Yeah, I mean,
You're saying that they
intention is
would.
we have consistency across the county, and
Right.
that's and they're the experts in code and ordinance. Now, that doesn't mean it couldn't come back to this group, and then this group endorses whatever process we want there and how we build. I mean, Chief Cusimano can speak to. He wasn't there, I think, at the time, but Mill Valley put this forward several years ago, and it was a bloodbath. I mean, it was painful, and I think that collectively, it's much more powerful if everyone in Marin is doing the same thing.
Mhm.
The it will be easier, if you will, for councils, because this may not be popular with everyone. When you talk about a non-combustible zone within 5 feet of a home, and I think doing it together is important. So to your point, if there's, power of MWPA, consistency, but I think when we talk about drafting of ordinances and code language, we rely on our fire prevention officers historically for that.
Jason, I think it's probably important to also add a nuance to that, is that's under the direction of the Marin fire chiefs, right? So the FPOs are not operating in a silo. The chiefs are coordinating that, but there are experts. So we leverage that, and you'll see that support coming from the Chiefs Association.
So a comment and a plea to the fire chiefs and your fire prevention staff, because I don't know if Chief Mahoney is online or not, but for Ross Valley Fire, but I recall that 3 years ago, it took a while to get from that group the fire code update. And I mean, we have to have it done by the end of the year. And, we have to do first reading and second reading and all that. So I know that this additional ordinance is very important, and I'm committed to doing what I can to bring it through the town of Ross. But I hope that it's not going to hold back our fire code update, because that's super important too. And it was complicated at the end, because we're rushing around and trying to get it done, and it needs to have that backup time so it's in place on January 1st. So that's my plea. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
Chief, mildly related, and I'm happy to take this offline after the meeting if needed, but how is the SRA versus the LRA areas delineated? Meaning, how do they decide which is which? And the
It's
reason
incorporated or unincorporated, and it's another distinction is made between federal lands. So it's either federal lands, there's just three types: FRA, SRA, and LRA.
right.
State is state responsibility or unincorporated areas.
Well, and the reason I ask is we've gotten feedback from some specifics, like in Marinwood, we literally have residents that some are in the SRA, the most are in the LRA, where, one street over, for whatever reason, they're considered part of the SRA, even though they fall under the Marinwood jurisdiction, and are still, paying whatever special assessments are for Marinwood. So I'm just kind of curious how some of that gets designated, if it's even known.
So it is known. So every 5 years, the state does a review of the state responsibility area. Things that can't be in there are irrigated agriculture, local LRA by definition is any city limit. So if it's in a city limit, so if you're an unincorporated Marinwood, then it's a watershed value discussion with the housing density, and so the lines are drawn. They were drawn with lines of convenience. So when it was drawn, there may not have been houses there. So if that line stayed the same and the housing density was low enough that it still, to the state's view, had watershed value, then it was left in the SRA. There was a big stink, if you recall, when they did the SRA fee 10 years ago. And you had somebody on one side of the street paying and someone on the other side. Now, the SRA fee has gone away, and we review the SRA maps with the state every 5 years as part of being a contract county. But the definition is, does it have watershed value? And if that's the case, then it's typically left in the SRA with a lower housing density. So those would be triggers to move it one way or the other. But those lines were set on a line of convenience. We actually did quite a bit of work around Marinwood after the SRA fee, and the state landed on those lines. And then, as Bill mentioned, the other piece, if it's federally owned, it's FRA. And that mostly has to do with the responsibility of costs for fire protection, wildland fire protection. So who's paying the bill? And if it's in the LRA, that's a local agency that has the financial responsibility for fighting fire. If it's in the SRA, the state carries the financial responsibility, and the same with the FRA. So that's kind of how those three land masses are broken out, but the actual application of the SRA is based on watershed value.
Very good, Jason. Thank you. I learned something today after 30 years. Okay. So, any other questions or comments going out to the public?
I see no raised hand. Oh, we have one. Give me one moment. Larry, go ahead, please unmute.
Yes, good morning. It's Larry Minikis. This is a great discussion. I just want to add to that us homeowners are emotionally attached to our heritage trees, and that it's important that as we're going out there to remind people we're not talking about removing their beautiful trees. We're talking about tree management. And I think in Orinda, this may have been part of the problem that they were having over on that side. Getting an ordinance passed because people are emotionally connected, particularly to their trees. And I just want to raise that because I know in the very beginning of this, we were hearing stories like in Mill Valley of people removing these huge oak trees from their front yards. And we were like, no. So I just want to bring that point up again. Thanks so much.
Oh, I did have one thing.
Okay, Jason has another comment.
And it's just if folks are interested in a little more background, the bill that's moved this forward in 2021 was Assembly Bill 3074 that directed the State Board of Forestry. So if you want to read some fun legislation, jump in there, but that's your background piece if you're looking for more information.
Okay, so no further action. So let's go to committee reports, 8A, Technical Advisory Committee.
Great, thank you. I'll keep this brief. The chair of the ATC was hoping to join us today, but is ill and not able to join today. So in the future, we'll be joined by either the chair or vice chair of the ATC to report out and listen in on these conversations. I just want to highlight maybe three things. One is we continue to work with the ATC to morph it into a more informal working group where we're really diving into details and asking questions, and it's a less formal agenda and kind of format than the operations committee. So looking forward to continuing to work with them to turn it into something that's really getting into the nitty-gritty. So one of the topics that we have added to that agenda as an ongoing item is the Zone 0 and ordinance updates question. So we had a really great conversation this time around, diving into that and kind of thinking through how we want to approach that. So looking forward to continued cross-pollination between these committees and more conversations. So another topic that we dove into was reporting out from the member agency staff on how it's going, coordinating with Willow Labs and the other consultants who are meeting one-on-one with member agency staff and thinking through how to use these tools to inform this year's work plan. So I met with member agency staff a couple of times just to check in and ask them three questions. One was, have you been working with the consultants? And if so, who are you working with? What opportunities and limitations are you seeing with the different tools? And then how do you think you'll use these tools this year within your zone? And our approach this year is really dive in, learn the tools, work within your zone to help think through what your priorities are, either for new projects or maintenance of existing projects within your zone. And then we'll explore the topic of using this, the tools for kind of bigger picture questions, maybe this year, but probably next year. But for now, let's dive in kind of zone by zone in terms of these tools. So some of the input included, this is not an exhaustive list at all, but it was interesting to see that different agencies are really focusing on different tools. Different tools seem to be providing the information that they're really interested in. We do continue to work with the different consultants to see how the tools fit together and stack on top of each other to answer questions. So we continue with that, and that was a big point of support from the different member agencies. With some of them, we had questions about ground truthing some of the data, so particularly the evacuation route work and the vegetation kind of related risk along the routes, and thinking through how to maybe ground truth some of those colors on the map. So that's something we're looking into. And then we also talked about eventually, after exploring individually and seeing how they work for the different member agencies, looking at kind of a consistent approach to using the tools across the different agencies. Of course, the agencies would help us develop that if, as we move forward. And then we've already been really diving into the use of these tools, particularly the pathways analysis with Southern Marin staff and also West Marin to kind of think through where high priority project areas are. And so Chief Tubbs and his agency has been a big part of that conversation along with West Marin agencies also. And then I think ongoing conversations will continue on how to present this kind of information to the public. Everything right now is really iterative. So all of the maps are draft. Everything's changing so much on almost a daily basis as we learn more about the tools and how they're useful and how to display the information, what variables we're looking at. So we do anticipate daylighting more of that sort of information in the future, especially as we incorporate these existing tools into future CWPP, that process and that update and that dynamic CWPP that we're hoping to work on in the next year or so. So, and then just in case anybody's listening from the ATC, I don't think so, but feel free to raise your hand if you have any additions, but I don't believe anybody else is on the line. So any questions or comments about the ATC?
Any questions or comments? I just have one. I ended up spending some time talking with our folks that are in the ATC and what their experience has been trying to use the tools and everything. And so I think, first of all, I mentioned this last time, I was completely blown away by the tools and the power of what they have. And some of the feedback I got from our group was that so far they're still learning the tools, first of all. So there's a lot more time that they need to spend figuring out how best to utilize them. They think that the tools are a very good way of communicating to people, so you can use them as a communication tool, but they are struggling still with how to use them as a planning tool for a future project. And so for an example, I think they use Bahia as an area that shows their tools. They gathered the work that was done, looking at both individual parcel work and then the shaded field break work. And they gave that over to have the analysis done. So this is what we've completed. Can you analyze that in your tool? And then it came back with some very nice percentages of flame height reduction, et cetera. So now they can communicate that out to that particular, data set. But that data set is not the whole community, right? It's just it's a limited around where the work was done in a particular targeted Firewise group, for example. And so they're still trying to figure out how results like that can be extrapolated and then used as a planning for broader areas going forward. And so I think what I'm saying is, I think it's too much for ops to ask that the tools become the sole focus of what drives the planning, because they're not there yet. But they are there now, that can be used sharing what is happening as a result of the work that's been completed. So I just wanted to share that from our group's perspective so far. And there's just more time to go. We need it. We need the tools, we need the data, but we need to figure out how to best use it so that it can help towards predicting where the best work will go in the future.
Yeah, thank you for that. I totally agree. And I think we're always going to need the local expertise to help guide that. I think the results of any, modeling run or looking at the tools and figuring out where the high risk areas are, where maybe some opportunities are, that's always going to need another step in the process where we're talking with the local expertise, on the ground, figure out what's feasible and desirable given all of these other factors that aren't necessarily built into the tools. I do want to thank you and your staff for diving into that. That's a really great exploration into how to use the tools to measure progress against our strategic metrics that have been, discussed previously, that are really complex. And we want to show our progress in terms of reducing risk around the JPA, and these tools are a great tool to do that. And your staff has been really fantastic working with Willow Labs and others to dive
Yeah.
into how to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And it is, you know, what's cool is that every zone and agency could decide which tools they wanted to try and focus on, right? And so our group chose tools that we know will be daylighted in dashboards. So they wanted to understand now how that information was going to be shown. Not all tools will do that, right? So it's just a work in progress, you know, and so.
Yeah, absolutely. And showing our work visually and in ways that are easy to understand for the public, but also provides opportunity to dive into the data a little more. That kind of seeking that balance and that kind of tiered reporting out approach so that it's easy and digestible, but also provides kind of, as some of our staff said, these rabbit holes where you can dive into the data and really learn more about what's going on and where risk is being reduced and which variables are being affected by the work. But yeah, it's an ongoing conversation, but it's exciting.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, if we can go out to public then, please.
Any members of the public wishing to speak, please raise your hand in the reactions. No public comment.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right, moving on to committee number 9, committee members' requests regarding future agenda items. Have any? Okay. Seeing none, do we want to go out into the public to see if there's? Just ask the public, perhaps there's a future thing they'd like to see.
Any
Hear us
members
talk
of the
about.
public wishing to speak, please raise your hands. No public comment.
Okay, thank you so much. That brings us to item 10, which is adjournment, and it is 11:28. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, everyone.